The Galactic conference chamber smelled like ozone, paranoia, and someone's attempt at coffee. Not human coffee. This was the alien equivalent, brewed from some bean that grew in a methane swamp and tasted like it hated you personally. Ambassador Cole Maddox took a sip, grimaced, and muttered, "I've been poisoned by better." He slid the mug away and leaned back in the floating chair with all the casual defiance of a man who knew he didn't need to be here to win. Across the obsidian table floated representatives of the Galactic Empire, shimmering, scaled, tentacled, chitin-armored, and very clearly offended. Ambassador Maddox, in contrast, wore a navy blazer over a black t-shirt that read, "Diplomacy, the art of saying nice doggy until you find a rock." His aviator sunglasses were still on, despite the room being artificially dim. "Ambassador Maddox," Chancellor Gorton rumbled. His voice was like someone chewing gravel through a reverb unit. "You arrived 22 galactic minutes late." Maddox sipped his Earth coffee, real coffee, Colombian roast, still hot in the thermos, and replied, "My bad. Took a wrong turn at Rigel. Blame hyperspace traffic." Advisor June Vega didn't flinch at the Chancellor's for-slitted eyes narrowing. She sat to Maddox's left, dressed like an interstellar librarian who moonlighted as a spy. Crisp blazer, minimalist jewelry, and boots laced with reinforced titanium wire. Her tablet flickered with live translations, her eyes scanning 3 alien dialects simultaneously, while her other hand scrolled memes. "Technically," she offered, "you're lucky we came at all. Earth's delegation wasn't even required. But we're polite." There was a thick pause, punctuated only by the low hum of power generators and the occasional squelch from Ambassador Drex of the Slork, whose gelatinous form was slowly melting into his chair. He spoke by vibrating his internal gases through a bioluminescent orifice. The translator chirped to life. "Politeness is not a recognized power structure within the Empire." "Clearly," Vega muttered. Gorton folded his 6-fingered hands and leaned forward. "We summoned Earth's presence here to address your violations. The skirmishes at Kalis. The unauthorized mining at Helion Prime. Your failure to respect our no-fly zones." "Your fly zones include 6 systems we literally discovered first," Maddox said, brushing imaginary dust off his sleeve. "But sure, let's pretend bureaucracy trumps cartography." "Pretend." Gorton's voice dropped into something subterranean. "You come without guards, without weapons, without armor. You mock our laws and demand your planet be taken seriously? Where is your respect? Your caution?" Maddox gave him a slow smile, the kind of smile that should have been illegal in most quadrants. "You seem to think weapons make someone dangerous." The chamber flickered with tension. The Empire's security teams bristled behind the Chancellor. For guards in adaptive armor, bristling with energy halberds and plasma rifles, stood at ready near the door. Another hovered overhead on anti-grav stabilizers, scanning the humans for concealed tech. They found nothing, not because it wasn't there, but because human ingenuity had long surpassed galactic standards for concealment. Gorton raised a claw. "You will surrender Helion Prime's assets to the Empire. Immediately. Refusal will be considered a declaration of hostile intent." "You say that like it's scary," Maddox replied, tapping his thermos. "Let me explain something. You ever seen a planet where it rains fire every Wednesday?" Drex burbled. The translator interpreted. "Yes. My uncle lives on one." "Great," Maddox said. "Now imagine growing up on a planet where the oceans tried to drown you, the atmosphere tried to cook you, the wildlife tried to eat you, and your own species invented 26,000 ways to kill each other before learning to boil water properly." "That's an exaggeration," Vega corrected. "It's closer to 32,000. My point," Maddox continued, "is Earth makes monsters. Not because we want to, but because we had to. And you're looking at 2 of them." There was a brief silence. Gorton shifted. "If that's meant to be intimidation." "Intimidation." Maddox laughed. "No, this is diplomacy. If I wanted to intimidate you, I'd bring in a Texan." Vega added deadpan, or an Australian. From the rear of the chamber, one of the Empire guards shifted and whispered to another. The translator failed to interpret it, But Vega's ears caught the shift in tonal frequency. She smiled without showing teeth. They think we're bluffing. Of course they do, Maddox said. They've read our dossiers. No weapons. No armor. Just coffee and sarcasm. Typical Earth arrogance, said Gortan. You arrive dressed like civilians. We are civilians, Vega said. And you dare insult this council. Maddox leaned forward, removing his sunglasses for the first time. His eyes were a stormy gray, piercing and unreadable. We don't insult. We respond. That's when it happened. Commander Zoll, one of the guards, stepped forward, 8 feet of snarling muscle wrapped in exoskeletal plating. Without warning, he slammed his armored gauntlet onto the table, sending a shockwave of kinetic force into the surface. Lights dimmed. The sound echoed like a drumbeat of war. Maddox didn't flinch. He simply looked at the broken edge of his thermos, now cracked from the impact. Damn. That was a gift. Zoll growled. Apologize. Maddox stood up. It was the kind of movement that shouldn't have meant anything. He wasn't tall, not by alien standards. Not massive. No visible weapon. Just a man in a blazer and boots worn down by age and war. And yet, as he straightened, the room seemed to shift around him. Like gravity itself paid attention. No, Maddox said. Zoll reached for him. It lasted 2 seconds. In one smooth, fluid motion, Maddox grabbed the arm, pivoted his body, and drove the alien's wrist into the table with a sickening crunch. Zoll's roar turned to a howl as Maddox locked his elbow and dislocated it with a precise twist. Then he sat back down. Diplomacy's about posture, he said, brushing his hands. This was mine. Gortan stood, his tentacles twitching violently. You assaulted a decorated officer of a galactic empire. No, Vega said, as calmly as if she were ordering lunch. He threatened a sovereign diplomat of the Terran coalition. Ambassador Maddox responded with a non-lethal submission, hold taught in 12 separate Earth martial traditions. And you're lucky he used the polite version. I didn't even use my thumbs, Maddox added. The silence was absolute. Finally, Drex gurgled. The translator said, I believe the humans are not bluffing. Gortan seethed. This is an act of war. Is it? Maddox asked, tilting his head. Because from where I'm sitting, you assaulted us first. On neutral ground. With a room full of witnesses. He gestured lazily at the holo cameras, recording every second. Gortan's voice dropped to a whisper. You cannot possibly think you'll survive starting a war with the Empire. Maddox stood again, adjusting his jacket. We don't start wars, Chancellor. But we sure as hell know how to finish them. He walked to the center of the room. No weapons. No backup. No armor. Just a man. He turned slowly, addressing not just the Empire's representatives, but the hidden cameras, the other species watching from afar, the council members pretending not to sweat. You want to know why human diplomats don't carry weapons? A pause. He removed his jacket, revealing the scars across his arms. Old burns. Blade marks. Something that looked like shrapnel from an energy grenade. It's because we are the weapons. Vega stood beside him. Earth doesn't send negotiators to beg. We send them to make sure you understand one thing. Humanity doesn't need threats. We are the warning. There was a stunned hush. In that pause, something ancient shifted. A realization crept into the bones of every alien present, as quiet as it was terrifying. The humans weren't reckless. They were intentional. And they just demonstrated a kind of confidence that no Empire-trained warlord could fake. Maddox checked his watch. Well, this meeting's gone about as sideways as expected. You want me to cancel lunch with the Andari delegation? Vega asked. No, Maddox said. They've got good wine and terrible aim. Could be fun. As the two turned to leave, the guards didn't move. Not one raised a weapon. Not one dared. Gortan spoke again, but his voice was lower now. Less imperial. More curious. What are you? Maddox looked back once, a grin playing at the edges of his lips. Earth's finest customer service department. And with that, the door hissed open, and the unarmed humans walked out of the most secure chamber in the Galactic Empire, without looking back. Behind them, the silence was deafening. But not for long, because in every star system watching, the message had already begun to spread. Do not underestimate the humans, especially the ones who bring only coffee. The corridor outside the Galactic Conference Chamber was suspiciously quiet. Too quiet for a building usually thrumming with bureaucratic noise, graph chimes, and self-important footfalls. Ambassador Cole Maddox strode through it like a man on a Sunday stroll, sipping what little remained of his now lukewarm coffee. The cracked thermos was dangling from his fingers, the battle-scarred badge of Section 1's unforgettable introduction. June Vega walked beside him, thumbing through her datapad, eyes scanning and highlighting legal clauses in 3 different galactic trade accords. "So, how do you want to play the next 10 minutes?" she asked without looking up. "Guns blazing, metaphorically, or are we saving that for dessert?" Maddox shrugged. "Let's see if anyone else wants to test our patience, or my remaining caffeine reserves." The moment they reached the lift tube, a squad of armored guards stepped out from the side hallway. 8 strong, polished armor, plasma rifles humming at the ready. Their helmets were adorned with the sigils of the High Inquisitor's office. Less law enforcement, more public intimidation. The one in front, taller than the rest, raised a hand. "Ambassador Maddox, Advisor Vega, you are to be taken into protective custody pending review of your conduct." June arched a brow. Protective custody. That's cute. Were the goon squads all busy? The guard ignored her. "The Chancellor has ordered your detainment under Code Red Theta 9. You are advised not to resist." Maddox sighed. "See, now this is where your empire keeps screwing up. You escalate things assuming you've got the upper hand, but you keep forgetting the part where we're humans." "We are unarmed," June added, swiping her pad off and slipping it into her pocket. "But we're also unimpressed." The guards raised their weapons, charging the emitters with that all-too-familiar hum of imminent stupidity. Before the standoff could slide into a galactic incident, a voice crackled to life in the hallway's air speakers. "Stand down, Sector 12, it barked. "Directive override by General Krilzak. All personnel reroute to Chamber Omega. The commander demands satisfaction." The guards hesitated, confused. Maddox chuckled. "Oh, this should be rich." A hover platform descended at the far end of the corridor, flanked by an entourage of war beasts and 4 soldiers in bone-plated armor. In the center, walking like a tank with legs, was Krilzak, one of the Empire's most feared field commanders, covered in scars and ceremonial medals that weighed more than most Earth gym equipment. Krilzak pointed a clawed finger at Maddox. "Your attack on our security officer has dishonored the Empire. As per the Pax Soric Accords, I challenge you to single combat." Maddox blinked. "Seriously?" Krilzak bared his teeth. "Combat. Now, can we at least get breakfast first?" "You will meet me in the arena chamber," Krilzak growled. "Or you will answer with your planet." "See," June muttered. "This is why we can't have nice things." 10 minutes later, they stood in the infamous arena of Ordos, a circular chamber of dark obsidian and neon-lit runes, historically reserved for ritual duels between species. The Empire hadn't used it in centuries. It was meant to be ceremonial, not functional. Apparently, no one told Krilzak. The warrior paced the arena with a massive energy blade crackling in one hand and a reinforced shield in the other. The crowd had gathered quickly. Senators, dignitaries, delegates from dozens of star systems, all watching from floating skyboxes. Galactic Twitter was probably imploding. June leaned on the rail and shouted down to Maddox, who was already stripping off his jacket and rolling his sleeves. "Remember to stretch, Cole. You're not 20 anymore." Maddox rotated his shoulders and cracked his neck. Good thing pain's a young man's game. A buzzing drone hovered between them and issued the formal challenge statement. Maddox ignored most of it. Something about blood right and honor and shared audience. He really only heard the last part. Begin. Krilzak charged. And immediately lost. To be fair, it wasn't entirely his fault. He'd prepared for a brawl, an honorable lumbering ritualistic show of dominance. Maddox didn't believe in those. He believed in surprise, leverage, and letting gravity do half the work. Krilzak's momentum met Maddox's pivot. The ambassador caught the arm, twisted, dropped low, and flipped the larger warrior onto his back using nothing but a redirect and a well-timed sweep. Before the crowd could process what had happened, Maddox had one knee on the general's chest and an elbow hovering an inch from his throat. Krilzak froze. His weapon clattered to the floor. Maddox leaned in close. Diplomacy lesson number 1: don't bring a sword to a judo match. The drone bleeped. Victory. Human delegate. The arena was silent except for the high-pitched laugh of a Slarvian ambassador who seemed to find the entire affair hilariously undiplomatic. Maddox climbed off the stunned general and offered a hand, not out of respect, but as a final insult. Krilzak slapped it away and stood on his own, his pride battered more than his body. He said nothing as Maddox turned his back and walked up the stairs to rejoin June. The Empire's silence followed them all the way to the corridor. June pulled out her datapad and began typing furiously. I just wrote a legal precedent that ritual combat is an acceptable form of diplomatic clarification under Section 14 of the Alliance Charter. Glad I could help with the paperwork, Maddox said, straightening his collar. Think that buys us time? It buys us about 3 hours, she said. After that, they'll either try to arrest us or assassinate us. 3 hours. That's practically a vacation. By the time they reached the diplomatic atrium again, a new assembly was underway, called hastily, attended nervously. No longer were the humans an odd curiosity. They were now a dangerous anomaly, a statistical outlier the Empire didn't know how to categorize. The kind that threw off projections. The kind that sparked revolutions. Chancellor Gortun was waiting. This time, he didn't speak first. Maddox walked in like a man who owned the floor and gestured to the table. Shall we continue? There was hesitation, but the Chancellor relented. We will resume the proceedings under revised understanding. However, the consequences of Earth's actions remain unresolved. June sat down and spoke clearly into the room. Earth's position is simple. We respect sovereignty. We expect the same. If lines are crossed again, we won't be responding with more coffee chats. Is that a threat? Barked one of the other counselors. It's a forecast, Maddox said. Bring an umbrella. There were murmurs of protest, confusion, fear. A Horkan ambassador, a small, lizard-like being with translator goggles, raised a claw. You speak of peace, yet solve disputes with violence. June looked him dead in the eyes. You misunderstand Earth. We love peace, but we also love knowing how to protect it. Sometimes that means conversation. Sometimes that means chokeholds. Gortun's tentacles twitched. You insult our process. No, Maddox said. We're expanding it. He pulled out a small data drive and inserted it into the central hollow emitter. Immediately, a projection sprang to life. Maps, files, casualty reports, and one blinking red mark. Helion Prime. June narrated. This is the site you claim we violated. In fact, it was a pre-existing settlement established by independent Terran contractors under the Free Expansion Treaty of Sigma Gamma 12. You don't own it. You never did. We have the paperwork. The Chancellor leaned forward. You expect us to believe you uphold contracts. Maddox smiled. Oh, we don't just uphold them. We weaponize them. And there it was. The shift. The moment the chamber turned. From mocking curiosity to hushed fear. The realization that humanity, for all its jokes and quirks, had entered the galactic stage not as comic relief, but as professionals. Unpredictable, unstoppable, and not to be trifled with. Gortun narrowed his eyes. You came unarmed to a chamber of warlords, and you leave unscathed. Maddox raised his broken thermos. That's what happens when you underestimate humans. We don't walk in unarmed. We are the arms. The meeting adjourned without applause, without ceremony. Just quiet, thoughtful, uneasy. As they walked out, June muttered, You know this isn't over. Of course not, Maddox said. We just moved the fight to a bigger board. Next move. He looked out over the starlit corridor, his reflection flickering in the polished metal walls. Now we find out who's scared enough to talk peace, and who's dumb enough to try round two. The communications blackout hit the Terran cruiser precisely 11 minutes after Maddox and June exited the council chamber. A pulse, silent and clean, rippled through the airwaves across half the station. Screens flickered. Holoads blinked out mid-loop. Local drones tumbled from the sky with sparks and stun chirps. For most of the Galactic Empire's diplomatic staff, it registered as nothing more than a systems hiccup. For Maddox, it meant one thing. "Someone's planning something stupid," he muttered, sliding his sunglasses back on as if the lenses somehow sharpened his instincts. June Vega was already halfway into the code lock interface on her wrist. Her sleek diplomatic tablet was now running a red border emergency protocol, its cheerful GUI stripped down to raw data feeds and encryption layers. She didn't blink. Cruiser Nightingale just dropped off grid. No uplink, no backup tether. "They've severed us." Maddox's jaw flexed. You don't cut the line unless you're prepping for a mess you don't want others to witness. And here I thought they'd wait until after dinner to try murdering us. From the shadowed balconies above the corridor, silent shapes emerged. Not guards. Not Empire regulars. These wore matte black armor, no insignia, no ID tags, covert ops. 5 of them. Then 8. Then 12. Perfect formation, silent step, coordinated like a hive mind. "Let me guess," Maddox said aloud, eyes never leaving the figures. "You want to escort us to a very secure room with very few exits and even fewer laws?" The lead operative said nothing, just raised his hand, palm forward. June rolled her neck slowly. "That's not an affirmative gesture in Earth culture, by the way. That means stop. Or back off before you get a face full of regret." Another silent hand motion. Weapons powered up. The hum of containment fields rippled through the corridor like tension waiting to snap. Maddox dropped the coffee thermos. It clattered once and rolled across the polished floor. "Okay, round 2 it is." They moved in. The first assassin reached June in a blur of motion. She turned, pivoted low, and jammed her elbow into the soft gap at the joint of his suit, sending him staggering into the wall. Her next move was cleaner. A high kick to the helmet, followed by a straight punch with a shock ring embedded in her palm. He hit the ground convulsing. 2 others rushed Maddox. He ducked the first swipe of an electroblade and drove a knee into the attacker's gut. The second had a hand on his shoulder. Maddox rewarded it with a palm strike to the throat and a swift boot to the knee that bent the wrong way. The man screamed behind his mask. "They're not just here to arrest us," June said, ducking a swipe of claws. "They're here to erase us. Then let's make it hard for them to forget us instead." Maddox drew a single pen from his jacket, clicked it. The explosion wasn't loud, just focused. A concussive burst of EMP and flash, lighting the corridor in a wash of white. The remaining guards reeled as their visors overloaded. He moved like water after that. Efficient. Brutal. His background in special forces didn't just show, it sang. Every punch, every dodge was calculated, honed over years of not just survival, but dominance. June matched his tempo like a second verse in the same song. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. By the time the smoke cleared, the hallway was a mess of groaning bodies and sparking suits. Maddox bent down to retrieve his thermos. Still cracked. Still empty. "Now I'm pissed." They moved fast after that. The station's internal sensors were still recovering, which gave them a 2-minute head start before Empire forces regrouped. June rerouted the emergency lights, reversed access protocols, and locked every path behind them. "This was coordinated," she said as they darted through a maintenance hatch and into a restricted access tunnel. "This isn't just retaliation. They want a public execution, something to show other species Earth isn't untouchable. They're going to need a bigger audience." Their goal was the auxiliary docking bay, smaller, less guarded, and home to their last backup exit plan. The Delilah, an innocuous cleaning ship with more firepower than its mop suggested. As they reached the last corridor, they found it already under siege. 10 more operatives, heavier armor, plasma rifles, and standing in their center, tall and ornate, was someone Maddox recognized. Senator Vurok of the Imperial Intelligence Council. Slender, polished, and cruel. He always moved like someone who'd never lost an argument, and never planned to. Ambassador Maddox, he greeted, voice like sugar dissolving in acid. And Advisor Vega. Such a shame you've become fugitives. You were amusing. Maddox stared at him. And you are predictable. Still are. You've embarrassed the Empire. Disrupted order. Broken protocol. June snorted. You tried to kill us. Forgive us if we didn't stick around for the applause. You've shown the galaxy that Earth will not conform, that you operate by your own rules. Yup, Maddox replied. Funny how we've survived this long with that exact strategy. Vurok lifted a hand, then stopped. The roof above them began to vibrate. Dust sprinkled from the ceiling. A distant, rhythmic thumping echoed down the corridor. June looked up, smiled. Finally, a door near the docking hangar exploded inward, plasma cut from the outside, and in marched 6 humans wearing what appeared to be janitor uniforms, complete with rubber gloves, goggles, and mop handles. The Empire guards hesitated, until one of the janitors raised a mop and fired a micromissile from a handle. Hey there, boss, said the janitor at point, bald, bearded, and chewing a toothpick. Figured you might need a little spring cleaning. Maddox grinned. You're late, Briggs. You were early. Got excited again, didn't you? Guilty. The operatives stormed forward, and chaos erupted again. But this time, Maddox and June weren't outnumbered. They were home. Briggs and his team, technically maintenance contractors, unofficially Earth's worst-kept secret, moved like a demolition crew during a ballet recital. Every mop was a disguised pulse rifle. Every cleaning drone carried a payload. One even deployed a bubble shield while playing Earth's national anthem on loop. June took cover behind a crate, pulling her own compact sidearm from what appeared to be a lipstick tube. Just like training simulations, Maddox returned fire with a converted clipboard, except with uglier targets. Vurok vanished in the chaos, no doubt crawling back to the shadows. But Maddox didn't pursue. Not yet. There was a greater message to send first. The hangar filled with smoke and the acrid tang of scorched steel. By the time the last of the Imperial hit squad was down, Briggs was leaning on his mop, looking around the wreckage like a man inspecting his grill after a fire. Well, they really threw the whole book at you. They tried, Maddox replied, walking to the ship's loading ramp. Didn't read the fine print, though. The Delilah's engines hummed to life. June uploaded the clearance codes and wiped the security footage en route. Where to now? Briggs asked, strapping in. Maddox looked out the viewport. Stars stretched across the void, twinkling with the promises of either conflict or diplomacy, or both. Straight to the council, he said. They're going to want answers. Time they got the right ones. Briggs raised a brow. You're just going to show up after all this and talk your way through it? I don't need to talk. Maddox glanced at June, who smiled without humor. I'm bringing proof. As the ship shot into FTL, leaving behind the floating ruins of one more failed ambush, Maddox leaned back in his chair. You know what gets me every time? June didn't look up. What? They always assume we're just here to play nice. That humans escalate fights. She smirked. We don't escalate. He grinned. We finish them. And somewhere in the dark, the Empire started to realize just how badly they'd misjudged Earth's idea of negotiation. The Galactic Council Hall was a cathedral of politics, built to humble, designed to silence. Its ceiling stretched beyond the limit of sight, curved glass vaults displaying a panoramic view of stars and swirling nebulae. A dais of 300 seats, each carved from the homeworld material of its occupant, encircled a central speaking platform. When the chamber filled, it became a chorus of voices, languages, bioluminescent flickers, and subsonic communication. Today it was quiet, uncomfortably so. All eyes, compound, segmented, and otherwise, focused on the 2 Terran delegates standing at the center of it all. Ambassador Cole Maddox didn't dress differently for this occasion. Same blazer, same boots. His sunglasses hung from the collar of his shirt, untouched since the hyperspace jump. June Vega stood beside him, tablet in hand, spine straight, expression unreadable. The bruises on her wrist had darkened into ugly blue blooms, and a thin cut traced her temple, remnants of the ambush 2 days prior. They didn't try to hide the damage. If anything, they wore it like medals. Emperor Voralix, the oldest surviving council member and the self-proclaimed keeper of balance, tapped a single claw on his chair's built-in sonic amplifier. The room vibrated with the frequency of his voice. Ambassador Maddox, Advisor Vega, you have arrived unannounced. The council was not prepared to hear further arguments from the Terran coalition at this session. Funny, Maddox said, stepping forward. We weren't prepared to be hunted down in the corridors of an Empire station, but here we are. Murmurs spread through the assembly like plasma fire through oxygen. Some recoiled. Others leaned forward. A few smiled. You bring accusations, Voralix said slowly. But no evidence. Incorrect, June said, lifting her tablet. We bring proof, statements, orbital logs, biometric readings, and unaltered security footage of an attempted political assassination against sovereign Earth representatives. We've uploaded it to the Council's core servers. You'll find the encryption is neutral-coded, verified by 2 Andari AI witnesses. Voralix's mandibles twitched. Included in that footage, Maddox continued, you'll find the identities of Empire operatives in Black Ops armor, acting under authorization from Senator Vurok. Also included is a brief highlight reel of us thoroughly dismantling said operatives, in case anyone's still unclear on how that turned out. A low rumble of amusement spread through the outer ring. Laughter in a dozen dialects. Maddox didn't smile. Let me be perfectly clear, he said, voice rising just enough to carry. We didn't come to this council to threaten. We came to remind you why diplomacy exists, and why Earth plays it better than anyone. You call this diplomacy, growled a blue-scaled delegate from the inner rim. You arrive armed with combat footage and war trophies. No, Vega cut in. We arrive with truth, and resilience, and receipts. Voralix raised one skeletal hand. The room stilled. The Galactic Council acknowledges receipt of evidence. A review will be conducted. There's no time for review, Maddox said, because while you deliberate, the Empire escalates. They tried to kill us because they're scared. Not of war, of change. They know the moment this council recognizes Earth as an equal player, the old power structures crack. And cracks? They spread. The silence that followed was deeper, heavier. The kind that measured decisions in heartbeats. June stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. You can't ignore what happened. If you do, you're not just sanctioning violence, you're endorsing it. You're telling every rising planet, every fledgling alliance, that diplomacy only matters when the big players allow it. That the rules are flexible. That peace is conditional. A delegate from the Ralvath sector blinked slowly, his facial lights shifting green. And what would Earth have us do? Hold the Empire accountable, Maddox said. Condemn their actions. Strip them of their immunity. Require that Earth's status be upgraded from observer to full voting member with territorial protections. The silence turned aggressive. Several delegates began speaking at once. Translated waves of protests, concerns, warnings of destabilization. A chorus of fear and friction. Then June pulled the last card. We have the recordings of Empire officials bragging about their actions, she said. We have communications intercepted from Empire channels discussing the assassination in advance. You want to preserve the balance of power? Great. Do it with truth. Or watch Earth release the entire data cache to the open galactic network. A gasp. You wouldn't dare, hissed the Empire's ambassador, rising slowly from his seat, his once proud voice now brittle with desperation. Try us, Maddox said. The council chamber buzzed. Lights blinked. Data streamed across private feeds. A dozen factions recalculated their strategies in real time. The implications were immense. Earth had never officially revealed its true data capabilities, nor the depth of its listening posts. Now, the galaxy understood. Terrans were everywhere, and they were watching. Voralix looked down at them with something like fascination. Your species is known for its aggression, and yet here you stand, demanding law, order, process. Maddox met his gaze. Diplomacy is just war with better phrasing. We'd rather use words. But don't mistake that preference for weakness. Why not release the footage now? Another delegate asked. Why threaten? Because we're still trying to be decent, June said softly. Even when you've given us every reason not to. The Emperor fell silent. So did the room. Then came a sound none of them expected. A slow, deliberate applause. It came from Ambassador Tyrion of the Vorth Coalition, a species known for neutrality and cold logic. Tyrion stood, still clapping with elegant precision. We've underestimated Earth, she said. And that's dangerous. Not because they're violent, but because they understand the rules so well, they know how to win without breaking them. More applause followed. Then murmurs of agreement. Slowly, ever so reluctantly, the tide began to shift. Voralix finally spoke. The Council recognizes the Terran Coalition as a full diplomatic entity. The Empire's actions shall be reviewed under Article 17. Until then, Earth shall have provisional voting rights and the right to deploy defensive assets to its claimed space. The chamber exploded in reaction. Shouts, light pulses, sent emissions from various alien species. It was chaos. It was history. Maddox didn't gloat. He just turned to June. Guess we're officially on the menu now. I liked it better when they thought we were the waitstaff. They walked off the central platform together, shoulders straight, backs unyielding. Briggs waited for them just outside, leaning casually against the entry pillar. You two make quite the show, he said, chewing on his ever-present toothpick. Galactic Council, huh? What's next? Maddox didn't answer right away. He looked back at the chamber, at the sea of alien species now forced to treat humanity not as an afterthought, but as an equal, as a force. He adjusted his sunglasses and gave a small smile. Now, he said, now we get to work. And somewhere in the Empire's crumbling halls of control, 1,000 whispers began to circulate. Not about Earth's weapons, not about its wars, but about its words, and how damn sharp they could be.